Emma Collins came into this world on a cold winter morning in December 1995. The snow was falling softly outside the small hospital in Millfield, Ohio, when the doctor delivered the news that would change her family's life forever. Emma was born blind. Her parents, Jack and Mary Collins, held their tiny daughter close and promised they would give her the best life possible. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Jack worked at the local car parts factory, putting in long hours to support his family. His hands were always stained with oil, and his back ached from bending over machines all day. Mary cleaned houses for wealthy families in the next town over, scrubbing floors and washing dishes to earn extra money. They were not rich people, but they had big hearts and endless love for their daughter. When Emma was just 6 months old, something magical happened. Mary was humming a lullaby while rocking her baby to sleep when Emma began to hum along. First, Mary thought she was imagining things. But night after night, Emma would match the tune perfectly, her tiny voice creating beautiful sounds that seemed impossible for such a young child. By her first birthday, Emma could hum complete songs. After hearing them just once on the radio, she would sit in her high chair, clapping her hands and singing along to music with perfect timing. Neighbors would stop by just to hear the little girl sing, amazed by her natural talent. When Emma turned 3, everything changed. The family was visiting Jack's mother, Grandma Rose, who lived in a small house filled with old furniture and memories. In the corner of the living room sat an old upright piano that had not been played in years. The wood was scratched and some of the keys were yellowed with age, but it still held its tune. Emma heard her grandmother mention the piano and asked to touch it. Grandma Rose led the little girl over to the bench and helped her climb up. Emma's small fingers reached out and pressed one key, then another. The sound filled the quiet room like magic, without any teaching or guidance. Emma began to play a simple melody she had heard on the radio that morning. Jack and Mary watched in shock. As their 3-year-old daughter played the piano as if she had been doing it her whole life, her fingers moved across the keys with confidence, creating music that brought tears to their eyes. Grandma Rose wiped her cheek and whispered, "This child has a gift from heaven." From that day forward, Emma spent every visit at her grandmother's house playing the old piano. She would sit for hours, her legs barely reaching the pedals, creating beautiful music that seemed to flow from her soul. She never needed sheet music because she could not see it anyway. Instead, she played by ear, listening to songs on the radio or television, and then playing them perfectly on the piano. When Emma started school, her teacher, Mrs. Linda Brown, quickly noticed something special about her. During music class, while other children struggled to sing simple songs, Emma would harmonize and add her own musical touches. She could hear when someone sang off key and would gently help them find the right note. The school had an old piano in the gymnasium. Mrs. Brown asked Emma if she would like to try playing it. Word spread quickly through the small school. As Emma played song after song, each one more beautiful than the last. Soon, children from other classes were sneaking into the gym during recess just to hear Emma play. Emma's parents knew their daughter was special, but they also knew they could not afford piano lessons. Music teachers in their area charged $50 an hour, money that Jack and Mary simply did not have after paying for rent, food, and Emma's special needs equipment. One evening, Mary was cleaning the house of Mrs. Helen Price, a retired music teacher who had taught piano for 40 years. Mary mentioned Emma's gift, and Mrs. Price became very interested. She asked if Emma could come for a visit, just to see what the child could do. The next Saturday, Jack drove Emma to Mrs. Price's house. The elderly woman had a beautiful grand piano in her living room, much larger and more elegant than Grandma Rose's old upright. Emma's face lit up when she heard Mrs. Price play a scale on the shiny keys. Mrs. Price asked Emma to sit at the bench and play whatever she wanted. Emma chose a piece she had heard on the classical music station, a complicated song by a composer named Mozart. Her small hands moved across the keys with grace and skill that left Mrs. Price speechless. When Emma finished playing, Mrs. Price sat in silence for a long moment. Then she turned to Jack and Mary and said something that would change their lives forever. She offered to teach Emma piano lessons for free, asking only that Mary continued to clean her house once a week in exchange. Emma began lessons with Mrs. Price the following week. The kind teacher quickly realized that Emma was not just talented, she was extraordinary. Within 1 month, Emma was playing pieces that usually took students 2 years to learn. Her memory was perfect, her timing was flawless, and her emotional connection to the music was deeper than anything Mrs. Price had seen in her 40 years of teaching. Mrs. Price began entering Emma in local music competitions. At age 7, Emma won first place at the County Fair Talent Show. At 8, she performed at the town's Christmas concert, bringing the entire audience to their feet with thunderous applause. By age 9, she was playing at weddings, church services, and community events throughout the region. People began calling Emma the Miracle Girl of Millfield. The local newspaper wrote an article about her titled "Young Pianist Sees Music with Her Heart." Radio stations invited her to play live on the air. Everyone who heard Emma play walked away changed, touched by the pure beauty of her music. Emma's bedroom was filled with ribbons, trophies, and certificates from various competitions and performances. But what made her happiest was simply sitting at a piano and playing. Music was not just something she did, it was who she was. In a world of darkness, music was her light. Jack and Mary watched their daughter grow into a confident young girl who never let her blindness hold her back. They knew that Emma had a gift that could take her places they had never dreamed of. But they also knew that their small town could only offer so much. If Emma was going to reach her full potential, she would need opportunities that seemed far beyond their reach. As Emma approached her teenage years, her talent continued to grow stronger. Mrs. Price began to talk about music schools and conservatories in big cities, places where Emma could study with the best teachers in the country. But such dreams seemed impossible for a working-class family from rural Ohio. Little did they know that Emma's greatest challenge and her greatest triumph were still waiting ahead. In a world much larger and more demanding than the small town that had nurtured her extraordinary gift, Emma was now 16 years old and had grown into a beautiful, young woman with long brown hair and a smile that could light up any room. Her fingers had grown strong and skillful from years of practice, and her musical abilities had reached levels that amazed everyone who heard her play. She could perform the most difficult classical pieces with ease, and her own musical arrangements were so creative that even professional musicians stopped to listen. Mrs. Price knew that. Emma had outgrown everything their small town could offer. The elderly piano teacher had taught hundreds of students over the years, but none had possessed the raw talent and natural gift that Emma displayed every time she sat at the piano. It was time for Emma to take the next big step in her musical journey, but Mrs. Price was not sure how to make that happen. One spring morning, Mrs. Price was reading the local newspaper when she saw something that made her heart race with excitement. There was an article about Emma titled "Local Teen Piano Prodigy Amazes Audiences Across Ohio." The reporter had attended Emma's recent performance at the State Music Festival, where she had won first place against students from much larger cities and expensive private schools, the article described Emma's performance in beautiful detail. It talked about how she walked onto the stage with confidence, guided by her white cane, and how the audience fell silent when she began to play. The reporter wrote about the way Emma's face glowed with joy as her fingers danced across the keys, creating music that seemed to come from another world. Mrs. Price cut out the article and mailed copies to several music schools and conservatories across the country. She wrote letters explaining Emma's situation and her extraordinary talent. Most of the schools never replied, but one letter changed everything. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Price received a phone call that made her hands shake. With excitement, the caller was Lisa Green, a music promoter from New York City who worked with the famous Monroe Conservatory. Lisa had read the newspaper article and was very interested in meeting Emma. Lisa explained that the Monroe Conservatory was one of the best music schools in America. Students from around the world competed for the chance to study there. The teachers were world-famous musicians, and graduates went on to perform with the best orchestras and in the most prestigious concert halls. Mrs. Price called Jack and Mary immediately. When she told them about the phone call, Mary started crying, and Jack had to sit down because his legs felt weak. This was the opportunity they had dreamed about, but never thought would actually happen. Lisa Green arranged to visit Millfield the following month. She wanted to hear Emma play in person before making any decisions about the conservatory. The news spread quickly through the small town. Everyone was excited that someone important from New York City was coming to hear their local piano star. The day of Lisa's visit, Emma felt more nervous than she had ever felt before. This was different from playing at local competitions or community events. This was her chance to prove that she belonged with the best music students in the country. If she failed this audition, she might never get another opportunity like it. Lisa Green arrived at Mrs. Price's house in a rental car, wearing an expensive business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and kind eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She had been working in the music business for 20 years and had discovered many talented young musicians. Emma sat at Mrs. Price's grand piano, her hands resting gently on the keys. Lisa asked her to play whatever she felt comfortable performing. Emma chose 3 pieces that showed different sides of her musical ability. First, she played a fast and technical piece by Bach that required incredible finger speed and precision. Then she performed a slow and emotional piece by Chopin that brought tears to Lisa's eyes. Finally, she played one of her own musical arrangements, a beautiful combination of classical and modern styles. Lisa listened in complete silence occasionally, taking notes in a small notebook. When Emma finished playing, the room was quiet for several long moments. Then Lisa stood up and walked over to the piano bench, where Emma was sitting. "Emma," Lisa said softly, "I have been working with young musicians for many years, and I can honestly say that I have never heard anyone play with such natural talent and emotional depth. You have something very special, something that cannot be taught in any school." Lisa explained that the Monroe Conservatory had a scholarship program for exceptional students who could not afford the expensive tuition. She believed that Emma would be perfect for this program, but first she would need to pass a formal audition in New York City. The audition was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Emma would need to prepare 3 classical pieces of her choice and perform them in front of a panel of judges at the conservatory. If she passed, she would receive a full scholarship that would cover all her expenses for 4 years of study. Jack and Mary looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and worry. They had never traveled far from Ohio, and New York City seemed like a different world. But they knew this was Emma's chance to achieve her dreams. The next 6 weeks were the most intense preparation period of Emma's life. Mrs. Price worked with her every day, helping her choose the perfect pieces for the audition. Emma practiced for hours each morning and evening, perfecting every note and musical phrase. The whole town rallied around Emma and her family. The local church held a fundraiser to help pay for the trip to New York. Neighbors brought food and offered to help in any way they could. Everyone wanted to be part of Emma's journey to success. Emma chose to perform Bach's Goldberg Variations, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and Chopin's Ballade. These were incredibly difficult pieces that most professional pianists found challenging. But Emma played them as if they were simple children's songs. As the day of the audition approached, Emma felt ready but nervous. She knew that this moment would determine her entire future. If she succeeded, she would become a student at one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. If she failed, she would return to Millfield and wonder what might have been. The night before leaving for New York, Emma sat at her grandmother's old piano one last time. She played softly in the quiet house, thinking about all the years of practice, all the support from her family and community, and all the dreams that had brought her to this moment. Tomorrow would change everything. Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared herself for the biggest audition of her life. The audition at Monroe Conservatory went better than Emma could have ever imagined. The panel of 5 judges sat in stunned silence as she performed her 3 pieces with perfect technique and deep emotion. When she finished playing, the head judge, Professor William Stone, told her that in 30 years of teaching, he had never heard such natural musical talent from someone so young. Emma received her acceptance letter 2 weeks later, along with a full scholarship that would cover all her expenses for 4 years. The entire town of Millfield celebrated when the news arrived. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Our Emma heads to the big city." Everyone was so proud of their small-town girl who was going to study with the best. Musicians in America, moving to New York City was like stepping into a completely different world. The sounds of traffic, sirens, and millions of people replaced the quiet peace of rural Ohio. Emma's dormitory room was tiny compared to her bedroom back home, but it was located just 2 blocks from the conservatory's main building where she would spend most of her time. Emma's roommate was a violin student named Katie Bell from California. Katie was friendly and helpful, always making sure Emma knew where everything was located in their small room. She described the city's sights too. Emma helped her learn to navigate the busy streets and subway system. The conservatory itself was magnificent. The main building was over 100 years old, with high ceilings, marble floors, and practice rooms filled with beautiful grand pianos. Emma could hear music flowing from every room as students practiced scales, performed complex pieces, and worked with their private teachers. Emma's classmates came from wealthy families around the world. Many had been taking private lessons since they were 3 years old and had attended expensive preparatory schools. They spoke multiple languages, had traveled to Europe for music festivals, and wore designer clothes that cost more than Emma's family earned in a month. At first, everyone was kind to Emma. Her fellow students were impressed by her musical abilities and curious about her life in small-town Ohio. Teachers praised her natural talent and her unique way of interpreting classical pieces. Emma felt like she had finally found her place in the world. Everything changed when Robert King arrived at the conservatory as a guest instructor for the spring semester. King was one of the most famous pianists in the world.
He had performed
with every major orchestra, recorded dozens of albums, and won numerous international competitions. His concerts sold out in minutes, and music critics wrote articles praising his perfect technique and brilliant interpretations. King was also known for being extremely demanding and critical of his students. He believed that only perfect performances were acceptable, and he was not afraid to tell students exactly what he thought of their playing. Many students left his classes in tears, but those who survived his tough teaching often went on to have successful careers. When King first heard Emma play during a group lesson, he seemed impressed. He nodded his head and made notes in his small leather notebook. Emma felt hopeful that she had gained the respect of such an important teacher. But as the weeks went by, King became more and more critical of Emma's performances. He would stop her in the middle of pieces and point out tiny mistakes that other teachers never mentioned. He questioned her musical choices and suggested that her interpretations were too emotional and not disciplined enough. The other students began to notice King's treatment of Emma. Some felt sorry for her, while others seemed to enjoy watching the famous teacher criticize the girl who had received so much attention when she first arrived. Emma tried to work harder and practice longer hours, but nothing seemed to satisfy King. The situation reached its worst point during a masterclass in late March. Masterclasses were special events where advanced students performed in front of an audience of teachers, critics, and music industry professionals. It was an honor to be chosen to perform, and Emma had been looking forward to the opportunity for weeks. The masterclass was held in the conservatory's main concert hall, a beautiful room with perfect acoustics and seating for 300 people. Music critics from major newspapers and magazines attended these events, and sometimes talent scouts from recording companies came looking for new artists. Emma was scheduled to perform Chopin's Ballade No. 1. It's the same piece she had played during her original audition. She had been working on this piece for months with her private teacher, perfecting every phrase and musical detail. She felt confident and ready to show everyone what she could do. When Emma walked onto the stage, the audience applauded politely. She made her way to the beautiful concert grand piano and adjusted the bench to the perfect height. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The piece started softly and gently, building slowly to dramatic and powerful sections. Emma felt the music flowing through her as it always did, her fingers finding each note with precision and grace. She could sense the audience listening intently to every phrase, but something felt wrong. About halfway through the piece, Emma noticed that King was moving restlessly in his front row seat. When she finished playing, the audience began to applaud. But King raised his hand for silence. What happened next would haunt Emma for months to come. King stood up slowly and walked toward the stage, his face showing clear disapproval. The entire audience watched in uncomfortable silence as the famous pianist prepared to give his critique. "Ladies and gentlemen," King began in his crisp British accent, "what we have just heard is technically adequate, but it lacks the essential elements that make great music." His voice carried clearly through the silent hall. King continued his devastating critique. "Music is not simply about pressing the correct keys at the right time. It requires visual understanding of the composer's written intentions, spatial awareness of the instrument, and most importantly, a connection to the visual world that inspires all great art." Emma sat frozen at the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly as King's words cut through her like knives. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes watching her as the most respected teacher in the room destroyed her confidence piece by piece. "Frankly," King concluded, "someone who has never seen a sunset, never watched a dancer move, never observed the visual beauty that inspires musical expression, cannot possibly achieve the artistic greatness that this conservatory demands from its students." The silence in the hall was deafening. Nobody moved or spoke for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Emma's face burned with shame and humiliation as she realized that her blindness, the thing she had worked so hard to overcome, was being used as a weapon against her dreams. Several students looked down at their hands, unable to watch their classmate being humiliated in such a public way. Some of the audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But nobody spoke up to defend Emma or challenge King's cruel words. Emma somehow found the strength to stand up from the piano bench and walk off the stage. Her legs felt weak, and her heart was pounding, but she managed to maintain her composure until she reached the safety of the backstage area. Only then did she allow the tears to come, crying silently as the sound of polite applause drifted through the closed doors. Emma ran to her dormitory room after the masterclass, her heart breaking with every step. She had never felt so small and worthless in her entire life. The cruel words that Robert King had spoken in front of all those important people kept playing over and over in her mind like a terrible song she could not stop hearing. Katie Bell found Emma sitting on her bed, crying quietly into her pillow. Katie had been in the audience and had seen everything that happened. She was so angry about the way King had treated her roommate that she could barely speak without shouting. "Emma, what that man said was completely wrong," Katie said, sitting down beside her friend. "Everyone in that room knows you are one of the most talented musicians in this entire school. King is just a mean old man who likes to hurt people to make himself feel important." But Emma could not be comforted. She felt like everything she had worked for her whole life had been destroyed in those few terrible minutes on stage. Maybe she would never be good enough because she could not see. Maybe she should just go back home to Ohio and forget about her dreams of becoming a professional musician. For 3 days, Emma did not leave her room. She skipped all her classes and refused to eat the meals that Katie brought back from the cafeteria. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about giving up on music forever. The piano in the practice room down the hall sat silent because Emma could not bear the thought of playing again. On the 4th day, Emma's mother called. Mary Collins had heard about what happened from Mrs. Price, who had received a phone call from one of the conservatory teachers. Mary was furious that someone had treated her daughter so badly, but she was also worried about Emma giving up on her dreams. "Emma, honey," Mary said over the phone, "I know that man hurt you with his terrible words, but you cannot let one cruel person destroy everything you have worked so hard to achieve. You have been playing piano since you were 3 years old. Not because you wanted to prove anything to anyone, but because music lives inside your heart." Emma listened to her mother's gentle voice and felt a little spark of strength return to her spirit. Mary was right. Emma had not fallen in love with music because she wanted to impress famous teachers or win competitions. She played because music was part of who she was, as natural as breathing or walking. That evening, Emma finally left her room and walked to the practice room. She sat at the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys, but no sound came out. She was afraid that King's words had somehow broken her ability to make beautiful music. Slowly, Emma began to play a simple scale. Then she played a melody she had learned as a child. Gradually, her confidence returned and she began to play more complex pieces. As the music flowed from her fingers, Emma felt her strength and determination coming back to life. Katie found Emma in the practice room at 2 o'clock in the morning, playing with an intensity that was almost frightening. Emma's face was focused and determined as her fingers moved across the keys with incredible speed and precision. Katie had never seen her roommate play with such fierce passion. "Emma, you have been playing for 6 hours straight," Katie said gently. "Maybe you should get some rest." But Emma was not ready to stop. Something had awakened inside her during those hours of practice. She was not just playing music anymore. She was pouring all her pain and anger and determination into every note. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was her weapon against anyone who said she was not good enough. Over the next few weeks, Emma practiced like she had never practiced before. She would get up at 5 in the morning and play until breakfast time. After classes, she would return to the practice room and play until midnight. Her fingers became stronger and more flexible than they had ever been. Her musical interpretations became deeper and more powerful. Other students began to notice the incredible sounds coming from Emma's practice room. They would stop in the hallway just to listen to her play. Even some of the teachers would pause. Outside her door, amazed by the level of skill and emotion they were hearing, Emma decided she was going to prove Robert King wrong in the only way that mattered. She would show him and everyone else at the conservatory that her blindness did not make her weak. It made her stronger. She would demonstrate that great music comes from the heart and soul, not from the eyes. Emma went to Professor Stone, the head of the piano department, and asked for a special favor. She wanted to organize a solo recital in the conservatory's main concert hall. She wanted to invite King and all the critics who had witnessed her humiliation. She wanted the chance to respond to King's criticism the only way she knew how. Through her music, Professor Stone was surprised by Emma's request. Solo recitals were usually reserved for senior students who were about to graduate, but he could see the fire in Emma's eyes and hear the determination in her voice. He agreed to let her organize the recital, but warned her that it would be a huge risk. If she failed, it could end her career before it even started. Emma did not care about the risk. She had already experienced the worst humiliation possible. She had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. She began planning a program that would showcase every aspect of her musical abilities. She chose pieces that were technically challenging, emotionally moving, and artistically brilliant. Word about Emma's upcoming recital spread quickly through the conservatory and beyond. Music critics who had been at the masterclass were curious to see how the young blind pianist would respond to King's harsh criticism. Students and teachers began talking about the concert, wondering if Emma could truly prove herself worthy of the conservatory's reputation. Emma sent a personal invitation to Robert King, along with a simple note that said, "I would be honored to have you attend my recital. I believe music speaks louder than words, and I hope you will give me the chance to share my response to your critique." King accepted the invitation, perhaps out of curiosity or maybe because he wanted to see if his harsh words had motivated the young pianist to improve. Either way, he would be sitting in the front row on the night of Emma's performance, watching to see if she could back up her bold challenge with real musical skill. Emma's family planned to make the trip from Ohio to support their daughter. Jack requested time off from the factory, and Mary arranged for someone else to cover her house cleaning jobs. Even Grandma Rose, now 82 years old and moving slowly, insisted on making the journey to New York City as the date of the recital approached. Emma felt both terrified and excited. This was her chance to prove that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and she was ready to show the world what she could really do. The night that would change her life forever was only days away. The night of Emma's recital arrived with a cold rain falling on the streets of New York City. Inside the Monroe Conservatory's main concert hall, every seat was filled with people who had come to witness what many were calling the most important performance by a student in the school's history. Emma's family sat in the third row. Having arrived that morning after a long drive from Ohio, Jack wore his only good suit, the same one he had worn to his wedding 20 years earlier. Mary held a small bouquet of flowers from their garden back home. Grandma Rose sat between them, her weathered hands folded in her lap and her eyes bright with pride. The audience included music critics from major newspapers, talent scouts from recording companies, conservatory teachers, and students from every department. Many people had heard about the confrontation between Emma and Robert King months earlier, and they were curious to see how the young, blind pianist would handle the pressure of such a public challenge. Robert King sat in his usual front row seat, his face showing no emotion as he waited for the performance to begin. He had been teaching and performing for over 30 years, and he had seen many talented students come and go. He was not easily impressed, and he certainly did not expect this evening to change his opinion about Emma's limitations. Behind the stage curtain, Emma sat quietly in a small dressing room with Katie Bell by her side. Emma was wearing a simple black dress that her mother had bought for the occasion, and her long brown hair was pulled back in an elegant style. She looked calm and composed, but Katie could see that her friend's hands were trembling slightly. You're nervous?" Katie asked softly. Emma nodded honestly. "More nervous than I have ever been in my entire life, but also more ready than I have ever been. I know exactly what I want to say tonight, and I am going to say it through my music." Professor Stone knocked on the dressing room door and told Emma it was time to begin. She stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and walked toward the stage with Katie guiding her arm. As they reached the side of the stage, Emma could hear the quiet murmur of the large audience waiting for her. The stage lights dimmed and Professor Stone walked out to introduce the evening's performance. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we present Emma Collins in a solo recital. Miss Collins has chosen a program that showcases the full range of classical piano literature, and we are honored to hear her interpretations of these masterworks." Emma walked onto the stage alone, using her white cane to navigate to the beautiful concert grand piano that sat in the center of the stage. The audience fell completely silent as she made her way to the piano bench and carefully adjusted it to the perfect height. She folded her cane and placed it beside the bench, then sat down and positioned her hands above the keyboard. For a moment, Emma sat perfectly still, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching her every move. She thought about her journey from that first day at Grandma Rose's old piano to this moment on one of the most important stages in the music world. Then she began to play. Emma had chosen to open her recital with Bach's Goldberg Variations, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical piano repertoire. From the first note, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. Emma's fingers moved across the keys with perfect precision. But there was something more than just technical skill in her performance. Each variation was played with a different musical character, some fast and playful, others slow and deeply emotional. Emma's face showed intense concentration, but also pure joy as she brought Bach's mathematical masterpiece to life. The audience sat transfixed, barely breathing as they listened to music being performed at the highest possible level. When the final notes of the Bach piece faded away, the audience remained silent for several seconds, as if they were afraid to break the spell that Emma had created. Then someone began to clap, and soon the entire hall erupted in enthusiastic applause. But Emma was not finished. She had carefully planned this recital to tell a complete musical story, and the Bach piece was only the beginning. Next, she performed Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but not the way most pianists played it. Emma's interpretation was deeply personal, as if she was sharing her own experiences of finding beauty in darkness. The slow, haunting melody filled the concert hall like moonlight, streaming through a window. Emma's playing was so expressive that many people in the audience felt tears forming in their eyes. Even Robert King, who prided himself on never showing emotion during performances, found himself leaning forward in his seat, completely absorbed. In the music, the Beethoven piece built slowly from gentle whispers to thunderous power, and Emma handled every dynamic change with perfect control. When she reached the dramatic finale, Her hands flew across the keyboard with incredible speed and strength, bringing the piece to a conclusion that left the audience breathless. Again, applause was thunderous, but Emma knew that the most important part of her evening was still to come. She had saved the most challenging piece for last, same Chopin Balladno, one that Robert King had criticized so harshly during the masterclass. As Emma began the opening melody of the Chopin piece, a hush fell over the audience. Everyone knew the significance of this moment. This was Emma's direct response to King's cruel words. Her chance to prove that great music comes from the heart, not from the eyes. Emma played the ballade with an intensity and passion that seemed to transform the very air in the concert hall. Every phrase was perfectly shaped, every dynamic carefully controlled, every musical idea clearly expressed. But beyond the technical perfection, there was something deeper in Emma's performance. A level of emotional truth that only comes from someone who has experienced real pain and triumph as the piece built toward its dramatic climax. Emma's entire body moved with the music, her face showing the deep emotional connection she felt to every note. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every sound as Emma poured her heart and soul into Chopin's masterpiece. When the final notes rang out and faded into silence, the concert hall remained quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly one person began to clap. Others joined in, and within seconds the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that shook the walls of the old building. The standing ovation continued for over 10 minutes. People were cheering, crying, and calling out "Bravo" in voices filled with emotion. Emma sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response, tears of joy streaming down her face. But the most important moment came when Robert King rose from his front row seat. The famous pianist walked slowly toward the stage, his own eyes filled with tears. He climbed the steps and approached Emma, who stood up from the piano bench to meet him, in front of the entire audience. King took Emma's hands in his and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Miss Collins, I owe you a profound apology. Your performance tonight has taught me that true musical vision comes from within, not from what the eyes can see. You have shown me that I was completely wrong, and I am honored to have witnessed greatness." King turned to address the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have heard tonight is not just exceptional playing. It is music performed at the highest artistic level. Miss Collins has reminded us all why we fell in love with music in the first place." The audience erupted in applause once again, this time even more enthusiastic than before. Emma's family was crying with pride, her fellow students were cheering wildly, and even the usually reserved music critics were on their feet showing their appreciation. Emma Collins had done more than just prove Robert King wrong. She had demonstrated that talent, determination, and an unbreakable spirit could overcome any obstacle. Her response to criticism had become one of the most moving musical performances in the conservatory's long history. From that night forward, Emma's life changed completely. Recording companies offered her contracts. Orchestras invited her to perform as a soloist, and music schools around the world wanted her to come study with them. But most importantly, Emma had proven to herself that she belonged among the greatest musicians of her generation. Emma Collins had silenced the world with her music, and in doing so, she had found her own powerful voice.